Good evening to everyone. I hope you're all doing well. Well, at least well enough. Welcome to Visiting Hours. This is when you get to hear stories from the most depraved minds I could find, so that you could experience the true epiphany of terror. I hope you'd enjoy tonight's stories, or at least they give you that thrill you so desperately need. For now, it is time to begin. I am your host, Beyond 5150, and as I'm sure you are aware, this is my asylum. You may have been brought here against your will, or you may have entered willingly, but now you cannot leave, for I am the master of misery, your sovereign of the spine-tingling, your purveyor of the petrifying. And here I am your god of all things horrifying. You will likely hear things you will wish was never spoken, things you have never heard. Try as you might, you won't find your happy place. Now, it's time to release the terror I have gathered for you tonight. Sit back, relax, and wait for the power of these horrors to twist you into my subservience. Tonight, I think we'll start with, well, one of our most desired authors, RichardSaxon. Now, I want to let you all know, RichardSaxon has a book he is trying to get published. Well, rather, he has it published, he just wants more people to look at it. I have placed the link down below to check it out on Amazon. Now, RichardSaxon is also one of my best storytellers. Well, writers, that is. I do the telling. But all of my authors are wonderful, and I want them to know how wonderful they are. How else am I going to bring them here and keep them here? So, please let them know how much you appreciate their work, how much you enjoy their writing. All of the links are listed below in the description to their Reddit pages, or if they have any others, I will also place them in that description. So please let them know you enjoy it. So we're going to get started with one from Mr. RichardSaxon. The title is, I don't know how you will receive this message, but you need to wake up. Before I get started, let me say hello to everyone who is here. Let's see, we have Dustin, good to see you, and Boggs. All right, welcome to see you. It's all right, Dustin, you don't have to stay here the whole time. And I went ahead and placed the link update on your tweet there, so if anyone else does join in, I welcome them. So, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, Boggs. Welcome, Dustin. I'm sure there's a few others, but currently that's all I can see. Okay, so the story, again, titled, I don't know how you'll receive this message, but you need to wake up, by RichardSaxon. I don't know how you'll receive this message, but you need to wake up. Those were the words that occupied my television screen. Moments before, I'd been watching an old Western movie with my wife, sleeping peacefully in my lap. It was past midnight, which meant I must have dozed off at some point. As the last time I checked, it had been just past 10, and work in the morning would be just another exhausting adventure. But The words that had replaced the movie brought me right back straight to attention. The world you live in is wrong. Wake up, Jack. I sat frozen in my comfortable chair, momentarily forgetting everything that existed around me. The name, as generic as it was, felt familiar, but it wasn't mine. My wife let out a slight groan, probably dreaming something and talking in her sleep as she often did. I'd considered if I'd actually fallen asleep myself, if I was dreaming. The only way to make sure was by letting someone else confirm what I was actually seeing. Mary, honey, wake up, please, I said as I gently shook her. She looked so calm, as if all the horrors in the world didn't matter as long as she was safe by my side. I took a moment to just admire her, and when I looked back up, the weird message had been replaced by the roll credits of the Western movie. The clock read 1:34 a.m., which meaning more than an hour had passed since the disturbing message popped up. Time had skipped, but to me, no more than a few seconds had passed. I remember that when looking at the time while dreaming produces weird results, it had to be a nightmare, nothing more. Yet I couldn't bring myself to wake up. I convinced myself that the message had been a product of my sleep-deprived mind, that I existed somewhere on the edge of reality with one foot inside the realm of sleep. Defeated, not feeling ready to get up for work in the morning, I just picked up a blanket and tucked my wife in. I was considering whether or not to just carry her with me to bed. It wouldn't be too hard considering my size, but I didn't want to wake her. Before I knew it, I suddenly found myself halfway up the stairs walking towards our bedroom. I took a glance at my watch and the time read 2:04 a.m. Another half an hour had just vanished. The realization hit me like a brick. I'd never sleepwalked before, nor did I have any history of absent seizures. Then I noticed the painting on the wall. It was one that had always been there, but one I had never taken a second to just observe. Realistically, I knew my wife had hung it there when we moved in together, but it was so distant, as if only partially existed when no one was looking. It depicted a group of people standing outside an ancient building, all of them wearing strange black gowns. In the dark, I truly couldn't tell whether it was a painting or an actual photograph, but my mind leaned towards the former. They were holding hands, but a lot of them were missing body parts, hands, legs, one even half their head, and none of them were smiling. At the bottom, there was this piece of handwritten text. Trial and Error, the first test, 2013, it read. The year felt so odd. Both the building and the outfits seemed so much older. Just staring at it produced a growing feeling of dread within my body. Goosebumps formed on my arms, and I knew time had come to get some much-needed shut-eye. No sooner had I made that decision before the world turned dark around me. Seconds, maybe minutes passed, and I woke in my bed with my wife sleeping beside me. The sun had just risen above the horizon, letting rays of warm sunlight penetrate our beige curtains. The events of the past night were already fading. It had to be a dream. There's no other logical explanation. "You okay?" Mary asked, with a tired groggy voice as she noticed me staring out into the world outside. I was standing in front of the window, staring, just wearing a shirt and trousers I always put on for work, but I couldn't remember standing up or getting dressed. You look tired. Couldn't you sleep? I don't know, I stuttered. I had some weird dreams. The light outside looked so strange. It was perfect in every sense of the word, rid of any obvious flaws. It shined brilliantly through a clear blue sky, only interrupted by a few pure white clouds. A brilliant orange gradient painted the horizon with trees dancing gently in the wind. That's the third time this week, Gary. Gary. That was my name. Oh, no, it felt all too foreign. I'd known it since I could form coherent words as a child, yet it somehow didn't suit me. Maybe you should schedule another appointment with Dr. June, Mary suggested. I agreed only because I'd known him for years. He'd helped me through some trauma, though I couldn't fathom how he could possibly analyze my dreams in any meaningful way. I called him after breakfast, and to my luck, he just happened to have a free session that morning. I let my job know I'd be late due to an appointment. As usual, they were more than happy to accommodate me. Gary, it's great to see you on this fine morning, Dr. June said with his usual level of enthusiasm as he welcomed me into his office. He always called me by my first name, claiming it made people feel more comfortable, letting them open up more. I couldn't deny that claim. The man pretty much knew everything about me. I told him about my dreams, and he jotted a few notes down into his book as he passively listened. Gary, why don't you tell me what you think these dreams mean? Such an obvious question. Yeah, I never saw it coming. I hadn't thought much about it. My concern was mainly getting rid of them, not understanding them. Though lately I'd struggled to figure out whether or not they were truly dreams and not a twisted version of reality. It's like my life isn't real, I finally answered. Sometimes I have flashes, pictures of people I don't know, but they all seem so familiar. I don't understand. He asked a few more questions after that before sighing and looking up at me. Gary, we've been talking about your dreams now for the better part of this year, and they're not getting better. Well, I'm not ready to give you a certain diagnosis. I'd like to put you on some kind of medication. Drugs? What kind? I asked. He sighed again. That's the thing, Gary. If I tell you how it works, you might be resistant to it. This medication is a brand new, and I've had good results with other patients suffering similar world-breaking ideas. I'd like to put you on it just for a few weeks. If it works, great, we'll talk again. If not, or if you suffer any side effects, we'll just stop the treatment. I'm not supposed to do it this way, but I need to know if you're on board. I looked at him with a questionable expression plastered on my face. He'd always been good to me, never doubting nor judging my stories. I trusted him more than most, so despite not being one to trust unknown drugs, I decided to give the treatment a shot. All right, Doc. You know best, I suppose. He handed me an unmarked bottle of pills with simple instructions of taking one each day before going to bed. That was all it would take to cure me of an undiagnosed disease that had been plaguing me for months. Once the session had ended, I headed on foot. My car was stored safely in a nearby garage, and I needed the fresh air to clear my mind. My mind drifted to the deepest parts of my mind, and as it did, the same weird flashes passed before my eyes. Images of people, places, and times that felt familiar, yet all too distant. They weren't mine. They couldn't possibly be, yet they were there. I was only jolted back to the world outside as I heard the faint sounds of someone crying. It was a girl, sobbing in the distance. Her voice echoed unnaturally through the busy streets, and while it took me a while to pinpoint their exact origins, I saw her standing in an alleyway on the other side of the road, ignored by the dozens of pedestrians walking by. I hesitated for a moment, worrying it might look odd for a massive guy to approach a strange child, but I figured I could help by at least calling the police or aiding her in finding her parents. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked calmly as I approached her. She couldn't have been much older than 8. She wore a school uniform and had bright blonde hair. "Where's your mom and dad?" I asked. She looked at me with a mildly shocked expression on her face. "They're not here. I want to go home," she said. "Where do you live?" She looked around herself. "I don't know. I don't like it here. This isn't real. I want to go home," she repeated. "What do you mean, this isn't real?" "Nothing is real. My parents are gone. The new ones aren't the real ones. They're not my parents. No one is real." She was getting increasingly more upset with each question, but what she said struck an eerie chord with me. Before I got a chance to ask any further questions, I heard the sound of sirens appear behind me. A police car parked on the side of the road, and a couple of officers emerged. "Joanna?" The little girl looked at me. "Don't let them take me," her voice in fear. "Joanna, it's okay. We're going to bring you back to your mommy and daddy," the policeman said. "No!" she screamed in protest as he approached her. "You're not real! Go away!" I looked back and forth between the little girl and the police officers that seemed as confused as myself. Hey, wait a minute," I tried to interject. "Sir, the girl is sick. She needs help." They argued back before I could make my case. "But just stay back, all right? We'll take care of it from here." She turned around to run, but there was only one exit from the alleyway, and it was blocked by the officers. Though my first instinct was to help, I didn't want to get arrested or worse. They seemed genuinely interested in helping her, and logically, I could understand why. But despite their actions making perfect sense, the situation just didn't sit right with me. "Please, don't let them take me away," she cried again. She was taken away before I could properly process what had happened. In my mind, I promised myself to call and check up on her, but once she was out of sight, it was as if my brain struggled to recall what had happened just moments before. Whatever the case, work beckoned and I had to go. It wouldn't be a particularly productive day, but my job entailed little more than tedious paperwork. Whether or not I was actually working, no one would ever know as long as I pretended to look busy. Once at my desk, I pulled the bottle of pills out to study them. The box wasn't labeled, nor did it come with instructions. It was just a container holding 30 small white and indistinct pills. I rolled one between my fingers, trying to understand how something so small could possibly change my life. While the little pill lay in my hand, my computer screen suddenly came to life. It was just a black image with a bit of text centered in the middle. "Don't do it, Jack." It lasted for a split second before going back to normal. Just that simple message, nothing more, nothing less. Whether they were talking about the pills or if they meant something else entirely, I didn't know. Whatever the case, I couldn't stay at work. I told my boss I was feeling sick, and like the great man he'd always be, he let me go home early. Once there, I just collapsed on the couch in front of the TV. Mary wouldn't be home for several hours, working overtime trying to complete a project, but I didn't mind. I made my way to the fridge, looking for some food. There was a plate of my favorite meal there, prepared by my wife. "I know you're under a lot of pressure. I just wanted you to know I'm always here for you. Hopefully this makes you feel a bit better. Love you, Mary." I let a brief smile break out. The first one in over a week. She truly was the best thing that had ever happened to me. I needed to get healthy again, if only for her sake. A modicum of happiness built up inside me as I devoured the meal in front of the television, each bite as perfect as the last. On the side table beside me stood the bottle of pills, and the time for the first one was nearing. I picked it up and held it in my hands as I kept my eyes glued to the movie I was watching. Then, as I twisted the lid off, I felt a sinking feeling in my gut. Then the television screen turned dark, filled with little more than a simple message. "Don't take the pill, Jack." That was the last push I needed to bring me over the edge. I don't know whether or not I'd lost my mind, but I didn't care. "What the fuck you want from me?" I shouted at the television. "Look at the painting," was all I got in response. At first, I didn't understand what they meant. It was such a nonsensical message on its own, but then I realized how I'd been extraordinarily fascinated by the painting on the stairs the day before, how I'd been frozen in place before it for almost an hour. The black screen turned back to the movie, and I put the bottle of pills down. I walked over to the stairs with weird picture hanging on the wall halfway up. The sun had just set, casting eerie shadows throughout the house. It obscured the picture to the point where I still couldn't tell whether it was a photograph or a realistic painting. Time passed, and it started getting darker outside. Still, I just kept staring, not sure what I was looking for. "Gary! What the hell are you doing?" My wife called as she found me standing on the stairs. "I've been trying to call you for hours. Why didn't you pick up?" Hours had passed, and evening had turned into early night. It had just passed 11 p.m., and Mary had been stuck working overtime trying to get in touch. I'd been standing there, staring at the picture for hours. "The picture? Where'd you get it?" I asked. Mary looked at me dumbfounded before turning her attention towards the picture on the wall. A confused expression formed on her face, and she approached me to inspect it. "I don't really know. I never noticed the picture before. It was just kind of there." Her comment confirmed every bit of oddity surrounding the picture. I reached my hands out to remove it, but Mary grabbed my hands before I could reach it, stopping me. Why are you stopping me?" I asked. I don't know. I'm just scared." I felt it too. The hesitation and the worry about what lay behind it. Still, I grabbed it and unhinged it from the wall. Once gone, all it revealed was a spot of absolute nothing. "What is that?" Mary asked in shock. I hadn't the faintest clue how to answer the question, because what existed behind the painting was literally nothing. A hole in the fabric of reality that it existed long before our times in the house. At least I knew it wasn't a dream. The world was real, but something had gone horribly wrong, and for some reason, I knew it would only get worse from there. Part 2. It wasn't an easy task to comprehend the mess in front of us. The emptiness didn't just appear as a black hole or invisible surface. It was more akin to what one experiences when closing one eye and then trying to explain what it sees. Not darkness nor colors, simply nothing. "Gary, please talk to me," Mary begged as we stared into the break of reality. I looked over to the pills on the table in the living room. They seemed so sinister then, as if the psychiatrist knew what I was about to experience. There wasn't anything wrong with me. Instead, it was the world that had been damaged. And then I turned to my wife to embrace her, to reassure her that everything would be all right, despite not believing it. But as I went to wrap my arms around her, the world around me simply vanished beneath my feet. I fell into an infinite void of darkness before finally feeling an electrical jolt surge through my body. When I opened my eyes once again, the world around me was blurry. I tried to reach my arms to gain a better understanding of my surroundings, but they were too weak and in pain. Apart from wriggling around, I could barely move. That's when I realized I was locked inside a glass capsule. Someone was knocking on the glass, a woman standing on the other side. "Jack!" she yelled. I tried to respond, but there was something in my mouth, a tube that forced air into my lungs, expanding and deflating them against my will. It was a life support system, but not one found in any hospital. I used all my strength just to reach out my hands, silently begging for the person on the other side to save me. But before they ever got the chance, I was slung back into the reality I'd come from. Mary stood over me, trying to shake me awake. "Gary, please!" she yelled as I regained consciousness. I was lying on the floor, soaked in sweat. I felt unnaturally cold, as if my body had been dead for hours, completely stiff and pale. Did you see that?" I asked with a groggy voice. "See what? You just passed out." "There was a woman. She called me Jack," I said. "You were passed out, Gary. It wasn't real." I wasn't entirely convinced, but the memories were fading all too fast, akin to a dying dream in the early hours. For each second that passed, the images of the glass tank and the woman standing above me were disappearing from my mind. I redirected my attention towards the empty space in the wall. It was an impossible phenomenon. Neither of us had the comprehension to explain. Before we got the chance to discuss the matter any further, a loud beep emitted from our television. We turned around, peeking into the living room where a single word had been plastered onto the screen. "Run." For a moment, I just stood there, dumbfounded and still unconvinced I hadn't absolutely lost my mind. It wasn't until Mary spoke before I snapped back to reality. "What's happening?" she asked. I don't know. Then the screen changed. "They're coming," it read. "Gary?" Mary tried to say, but we were interrupted by loud knocking on the door.
"Mr. Whitmore, open up!"
A manly voice said from the other side. "What's going on, Gary?" Mary asked. "I don't know. Stay here." I opened the door to find two men dressed in dark uniforms. They were both armed, though they weren't wielding their weapons. "Mr. Whitmore, you need to come with us," they said. Mary tried to protest, but they ignored her. I tried to calm her down as they ushered me towards their car. As much as I begged for answers, they wouldn't give me any. I turned around to say goodbye to my wife, at which point they violently grabbed my arm.
"Take care of her,"
one of the men said. The other nodded in response before approaching Mary. She tried to walk backwards away from them, but the man was too fast. He gently touched her shoulder, causing her to freeze in place, her eyes lighting up with panic.
"Leave her alone!"
I yelled, but it was too late. Mary had been frozen in place by an unseen force. Her shoulder was locked in midair, and whatever was affecting her seemed to be spreading. I can't breathe. She managed to get out before her entire chest had locked solid. It was as if time had stopped only for her, freezing each atom within her body in place.
"Mary!"
I screamed. The two men pulled me into the car, too strong for me to even think about resisting. And once inside, one of them picked up a radio attached to the dashboard. "Initiate protocol B7 at Stanford Street 7, the man said into the radio. A distorted voice responded, confirming the order. I looked down at my arm. Red marks had formed exactly where they had grabbed me. It hurts, even burning, as if someone had lit it on fire with invisible flames. The sensation seemed to dig its way through my skin, filling my veins and spreading up my arm. "What did you..." I started to say as my words began to slur. The world before me went blurry, and before I could process what had just happened, I fell into a black void of emptiness. As I lingered in my own unconsciousness, I saw flashes of places and people I didn't know. Despite the unfamiliarity, they awoke an undying feel of nostalgia within me. I felt at home, as though filled with a jamais vu. A voice called out through the darkness, breaking through the flashes. "Jack," it whispered. "Wake up." With that, I was thrown back into my body. I was being held up by two men who had kidnapped me, and by the look of their surroundings, we were inside an elevator going up. "He's awake," one of the men stated matter-of-factly. "Doesn't matter. He doesn't have anywhere to go." There was only one button visible within the elevator, and no sign to tell us which floor we would eventually land on. Still, minutes would pass before the lift finally came to a standstill. The doors opened. I was pushed into a large, empty room, too clean to possibly exist in reality. All it contained was a few chairs and a desk covered in documents. In the back of the room, an old rotary phone hung attached to the wall with no visible cables connecting it to a network. "What is this place?" I asked, without getting a response. They put handcuffs on me as they forced me to sit by the desk, none of them speaking a word. They just stood there with angry expressions on their faces. What do you want from me? I asked.
Do you know where you are, Jack?
One of the men asked. He called me Jack, a name that wasn't mine, but had become all too familiar during the past few days. The pit in my stomach was just barely alleviated by the hopes it might all be just a case of a mistaken identity. That's not my name. I'm Gary Whitmore. I basically shouted at the man standing 3 feet away. He shook his head.
Do you really believe that?
What do you mean?
You don't belong here, Jack Lawrence. This isn't your world.
His words resonated with me in the most horrific way. Part of me knew he was right, but I couldn't accept it. My mind wandered back to the little girl I'd found in the alley. Her claims that the world wasn't real rung through my every thought. This world isn't real? I half asked, half stated. The men looked at each other. A brief moment of disappointment washed over their faces.
Our world isn't yours to destroy,
he said, while ignoring my question.
Unfortunately, as your awareness of your real life increases, the damage to your surroundings follows suit. It's our job to stop that from happening. Unfortunately, that doesn't leave us with many viable options.
I looked around the room again. It seemed so clean, too simple to match reality. Not a speck of dust littered any surface, nor did it produce an echo as it would have been in a case in a large, empty space. It felt as if the place wasn't trying to maintain the illusion of being reality. What are you trying to say? I asked, though I had my suspicions.
That you have to die, Jack.
For whatever reason, the words didn't scare. Instead, my thoughts drifted to the girl again, the only other person that had gone through the same thing. The girl, I mumbled.
You
took her too, I said. The men looked at each other as if mulling over how to respond to me.
She posed danger to us all. We did what we had to do.
You killed her? I asked, half in shock. He just nodded.
Though death remains an inadequate description of the process, simply killing your physical body isn't enough. Your entire presence in this world needs to be erased.
I was conflicted. If our presence here would kill innocent people, I could hardly blame them for defending themselves. Still, she had just been a child, and soon I'd suffer the same fate. Why not erase me immediately? Why did you bring me into this room?
Because we need to know where the others are.
What others?
The others like you. Intruders that belong in a different world.
With that, the man who had been silent up to that point brought out a cable attached to a syringe-like apparatus. He grabbed my hair and pushed my neck forwards to gain better access before preparing to insert the thing. Wait! Please! But despite my pleas, they jammed the thing into the back of my neck. A surge of electricity shot through my body, paralyzing me instantly. It felt like my mind disintegrated. The fabric of reality started to fall apart, revealing more outlines of a world that never belonged to me. For a moment, I was connected to it, truly merged with each and every atom. For a moment, I could see everything and everyone in the entire world with just a few strange identities separating themselves from the rest. I knew then and there that these people were like me, humans that didn't belong. Then,
As soon as the ordeal had begun, the information was stripped away from me. I was forced into the wrong world that I've known my entire life, back in the room with the two men.
"We got it. Take him to the factory,"
the main interrogator said. The shock from what I had just seen sent me into a panicked frenzy. Who are those people? Where are you taking me?" I shouted. They unbuckled me from the chair, leaving the handcuffs on, but as they prepared to take me out of the room, the rotary phone on the back of the room started ringing. The men stopped dead in their tracks, their calm expressions turned to ones of absolute terror. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then the main interrogator nodded his head, at which point the second man diligently rushed over to the phone and picked it up.
"Hello?"
he asked nervously. The room fell silent as the man listened to the unknown voice on the other end. It was too quiet for us to hear, but the man's expression looked increasingly worried as the conversation went on. All the while, the interrogator just stared impatiently at his partner. After a brief minute that felt like an hour, he hung up and turned toward us.
"Who was it?"
the interrogator asked.
"They called from the outside. We have to let him go."
The main interrogator didn't even question the orders. He just pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked my handcuffs.
"It doesn't change anything.
We will still eliminate the others," he said, as he pulled the cold metal off my wrists.
"Did they say anything else?" "Yeah. He has to visit this address,"
the man said as he handed me a piece of paper containing a street name and a room number. On the bottom, a strange symbol had been stamped on it. It felt odd to look at it, as if the mark only partially existing, vanishing from my mind as soon as I took my eyes off of it.
"He has to visit the core. Are you sure?"
the interrogator asked. The man just nodded in response.
"And they told me to give him a message."
"What message?" I asked.
"I'll see you soon, Jack."
Those were the last words the men ever spoke to me before they ushered me into the elevator. They looked angry, but more than anything, they seemed afraid of what was to come. I had been freed, but despite my miraculous escape from the facility, I didn't feel safe. After all, I hadn't the faintest clue where I was going. Still, I had a sinking feeling of absolute dread building up within me, an uncertainty that no matter what I did, things would only get worse from here. Be starting part 3 momentarily. I'm going to have a little bit of drink. And say hi to everyone who has shown up. I see we have Onyx. Good to see you. And Mama and Josie. Good to see you all. Who else? Anyone else? Oh, Mighty. Hi, Mighty. What are you doing? Good to see you. All right. Wow, this kind of feels like the Matrix. It's pretty good. All right. We're going to start part 3. As the elevator lowered me towards the ground floor, I looked at the address. I recognized it as a government building in the center of town, plain enough to fade from memory despite its massive size. I wanted nothing more than to just go home and see my wife, but the thought had occurred to me that even she might be part of the illusion. I needed answers, and despite my trepidation about visiting the core, I had no other options. The time skips had all but ended alongside my obliviousness regarding the simulation. The phenomenon I'd always thought of as an autopilot was simply gone. But with the awareness, I could suddenly see all the glaring holes in the reality I'd been living in. They were fractures in the fabric of reality itself, unknown to the entire population. Holes in the sky appeared and vanished in split second. While they weren't world-shattering, they were obvious enough to break any illusion the world was a real place. On the rare occasion that anyone blissfully ignorant would notice them, it could have been easily written off as a trick of the eye or tiredness. Worst-case conspiracies would arise, but to anyone they'd just been awakened to the true nature of reality, it became painfully obvious just how broken existence had gotten. Was it my fault? The interrogators had mentioned that people like me could break the world, but was it truly the cause of all the glitches around me? For a moment, I questioned how everyone around me could just go about their days and not notice that anything was wrong. But I'd been a part of it myself, only able to wake up when someone literally shoved the truth in my face. Reaching the government building didn't take long. I'd already seen it hundreds of times, but only then did I finally notice how out of place it felt. Though it outshined every surrounding structure in terms of size, it was such a nondescript and dark place. There were no people entering or leaving the place. It simply stood there, with open doors, seemingly forgotten by the world around it. Whether it was by design or a side effect of the damaged world, I didn't know. There was no security protecting the main entrance, allowing me to walk into the main hall, a neatly decorated reception. There was only a woman sitting behind the desk, and a couple of heavily armed guards standing by a set of elevator doors on the far side of the room. They stared at me in silence as I came in, seemingly confused as to how I noticed the place. I approached the receptionist, not sure what I was supposed to do, so I just handed her the piece of paper. She quietly took the piece of paper while the guards kept their eyes planted on me. As she read it, her neutral expression immediately turned to one of utter fear, similar to what had happened to the interrogators. You're one of them? She stuttered. One of who? Please, don't do it. Don't destroy us, she begged. What are you talking about? I'm not going to hurt anyone. I just want to find out what the hell's going on. I want my wife back. They looked at each other. The guards approached us with their weapons drawn, but the woman just shook her head at them and they backed off. Just go inside the elevator. She'll take care of the rest. Who's she? I asked. Just go. The doors to the elevator opened up, and I stepped inside as the guards started in horror. Without me having to push a single button, it simply started moving upwards. It passed nameless floor after floor, stretching for a distance far outreaching the height of the building itself. Just like last time, I started to realize I wasn't being taken to a physical place within the building, but a different realm entirely. Secure and hidden from the rest of the world. After what felt like an ungodly amount of time, I reached the top. The doors opened, and without really moving, I suddenly found myself within a plain, metallic room that looked far too clean to even resemble a realistic one. The doors closed shut behind me, and with that, every trace of the elevator had been erased. It simply ceased to exist. Or maybe it never had. Regardless of the case, I was trapped with no escape. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing back at me over and over. "Hello, Jack," a female voice called back. But unlike my own, it didn't echo. Nor could I begin to even decipher its origin. It came from everywhere and nowhere, all at once, causing me to feel disoriented in the large, nondescript room. "That's not my name. Look, I don't know what this place is. I don't even know if this world is fucking real, but I'm not a bad guy. I just want my wife back. It doesn't matter what you do to me. She's innocent." "Where do you think you are?" the voice asked. I looked around the room, still not able to fully comprehend my surroundings. I don't know. "What the fuck does it matter?" I asked. "Answer the question, Jack." I thought back at all of the bizarre events. I knew it wasn't a dream, but the painful fact that my entire life was a lie had become painfully obvious. "This world isn't real," I stated as confidently as I could. "What does it mean to be real?" the woman asked in response. It was a question I honestly couldn't answer. Though it sounded easy enough, the implications of any answer I could possibly give would have all felt wrong after I spent my whole life in what could only be a simulation. "Do you think the people here consider themselves fake?" she asked. I suppose not." "Then let me ask you this, Jack. Your friends, your family, your wife, do they not feel the same way you do? Does their love mean any less because of what they are? How about their pain, their suffering, their fear? Are those emotions not real?" she asked. I don't know. Their emotions are little more than electrical impulses surging through an impossibly complicated computer system. Little charges that produce thoughts, ideas, and independent thought. How is that any different from how your consciousness functions inside your brain? That's different. I tried to begin, but it was a thought I couldn't logically continue. Yes, this world was created by the people in your world, but how do you know that your world isn't just another piece of the puzzle? The being you have named God, or the Big Bang Theory. How do you know that these aren't similar experiments conducted by creatures beyond your comprehension? While your universe might be on the highest level of creation, you can never know for sure. Just like people here. I had so many questions left to ask, but one stood more prominent above all others. Why are you telling me all of this? Because, Jack, your wife is threatening to end this world unless we let you go. Your very presence and that of the people like you will eventually fracture the fabric of our reality. That is why I need you to leave. If leaving is an option, why try to kill me in the first place? I asked, getting angrier by the minute. She paused for a moment, allowing the deafening silence in the room to sink in. None of it felt real. As seconds ticked by, I started to hear the sound of my own heart beating. Because creating an exit leaves us exposed. It would be safer to just destroy you. She had said it so matter-of-factly, reducing me to little more than an afterthought. We don't have much time. Your wife is looking for you, she said. Mary, but I saw her. Those men, they did something to her, I said with a shaky voice. Mary is not your wife. You're wrong. I remember her. We have a life together. You did have a life together, but that life never belonged to you. I was overwhelmed by the information and thought it was breaking my heart. I didn't struggle to believe it. Every odd occurrence, the weird flashes, the dream about the weird glass capsule, the world I had been living, it wasn't real. But it wasn't a dream either. It was a place I'd been sent to, but why or how, I didn't remember. I took a moment to breathe, wishing I had been left in ignorance to stay with Mary. But I didn't want the one waiting for me in the real world because I didn't know her. What if I don't want to leave? I asked. If you stay here, everyone will die. She was right. Just like the interrogators had said, my presence and that of those like me was dangerous. I had to leave. You can ask me one more question, Jack, but then it's time to go. I only thought about it for a second. If I was to leave everything I knew and loved behind, I had to know where I was going. Who am I? Your name is Jack Lawrence, the voice began. You were 29 years old. You worked as tech support for a law firm. In 2015, you went missing after a traffic collision on Glover Street after a fight with your wife. The doctors who treated you pronounced you brain dead. But after your wife demanded a second opinion, you were sent in for that special treatment, where you were falsely pronounced dead. You do not belong in this world, Jack, and your knowledge of that fact has put this world in danger. None of the memories rang a bell, yet I could see vague flashes of them as the woman spoke. They were so foreign and scary. It's time to go. Wait, I begged. What about the others? I mean the other real people. I will destroy them. You're going to kill them? Just like that? Wouldn't you? If a handful of people had to die to save billions, could you not make that decision, Jack? She wasn't wrong, but I couldn't accept that I'd killed anyone that easily, as true as it might have been. This is your last chance. You have to leave now, she ordered. How? You'll know as soon as you leave the building. And Mary? She'll live. Once you're gone, every trace of your existence here will be removed. To her, you never set foot in our world. She will live on as if you had never met. The entire world will forget you as soon as you step through the gateway to your own world. Goodbye, Jack. With that, the voice vanished, and I found myself back inside the elevator heading down. The transition had been so seamless, as if the room had never even existed. After all that, I still hadn't had the faintest clue of who I'd spoken to, or whether or not they'd even supposed to be human. Regardless of who she had been, she was right. No sooner had I set foot outside the elevator before I knew how to escape. there would be a portal created in the very same place I met Mary, down by the pier where we first met. I'd been daydreaming bumping into her, which caused her hat to be caught by the wind and blow into the water. Feeling embarrassed and partially wanting to impress her, I climbed down, naturally slipping on the rocks and stumbling headfirst into the sea. She laughed, and I never did end up finding her hat, so to make it up for her, I invited her out for ice cream. That's where I had to go. The main source of my happiness would be the place that took me away. Once I reached the lobby, the guards just stared at me as if they had seen a ghost. Their faces turned pale and their hands trembled. They were terrified of me. "Why are you afraid?" I asked. "I just want to leave." But that's when I realized that my disguise as one of them had been shattered. They had always known I was dangerous, but only then did they realize that their world was a simulation. I looked down on my hands. They were messed up, glitched, as if my own body was disintegrating. I couldn't hide anymore. "I knew it. I just never believed it," one of the guards said. "It's all pointless." With that, he lifted his gun to his head and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Blood, bone, and pieces of brain splattered onto the wall behind him as the second guard fell to his knees in shock. The receptionist just cried as she saw me, finally knowing her whole world was a lie. From that moment on, any person that saw me, even for the briefest of moments, would know what the world truly was. I had to find a way to cross the city without shattering the world, but it was a futile task. Though not everyone that saw me reacted with fear or despair. Some even laughed, while others didn't even seem to care. Right then, I was happy that the world would forgive me. But that could only happen if I left as soon as possible. But what I hadn't anticipated was the acceleration of the damage caused as I'd gained total awareness. The holes I'd seen were all growing, tearing apart the fabric of reality itself. Buildings getting erased before my eyes, and people frozen in place as their bodies ceased to function. As the people realized their world was held together by a thin layer of cables and code. It was simply too much for the simulation to handle. I started to run, trying my best to avoid people lest the world tear apart before I could escape. While my own death had become a preferable option, I remembered the interrogators repeat that my demise wouldn't be enough. For the world to be saved, I had to be either destroyed or removed. When I finally reached the pier where I had my first date with my wife, but that time the ocean was gone, simply erased from existence, leaving behind a rapidly dying sea life on the barren ground. The sky around the horizon had shattered like cracking glass. But standing in stark contrast to the destruction, I found Mary standing by what used to be the ocean side, staring into the distance. "Mary!" I called out. "You're here," she said, obviously in shock. "How did you know where to find me?" I don't know. I just knew. I saw you in my memories talking to that woman. I heard the truth, Gary." "That you're not real?" I asked. "But I am. How could you say that after all this time? I love you. I have ever since the first moment I saw your clumsy self. How is that not real? Just because this isn't your world doesn't make our experience any less important." I grabbed her in my arm, her body pressed against me as tears welled up in my eyes. We'd been through everything together. but staying behind would have ensured both of our deaths. I don't want to go, I sobbed. As I uttered those words, a hole formed at the end of the pier. Unlike the rest of the damaged, loud world, the hole was perfectly calm. A perfect black void to end it all. You have to, she responded somberly. I'll miss you. But that last part was a lie. And if she somehow had been an observer to our conversation, she knew that. As soon as I set foot through the gateway, I'd be erased from their existence. My past, my present, my future would all vanish to save their world. I love you, Mary. I love you too, but you have to go now. You have a life out there, a wife. Don't live it wishing you were here. Don't give up on your real life. She gave me a final kiss before she let me go. The cracks in the world were finally reaching a critical point where everything was falling apart. I just hoped it would be patched up in my absence. Go, Mary whispered. I ran towards the exit, giving Mary a last glimpse as I dove through the hole in reality. Then it was all gone. I fell through an infinite void as my atoms were stripped away from my body. I tried to let out a scream, but without a physical body, I could do nothing but suffer, as physics itself failed me. But whether an eternity or a single moment had passed, I wouldn't regain consciousness until I found myself back inside the glass tank filled with a strange liquid I couldn't identify. There was still a tube stuck inside my throat, pumping air into my lungs and keeping me alive. Through the glass, I could see a woman fumbling around with some buttons. "Hold on, Jack!" she screamed as she noticed I had awakened. With that, the capsule opened and I was dragged into a world I couldn't remember. "Jack! I knew you'd find your way to me eventually," she said as she held my atrophied, naked body in her arms. But I didn't know her name, nor could I recognize her face. All I had were a few nondescript flashes from our supposed life together. She helped me remove the tube from my lungs, letting the air burn my lungs as I desperately gasped for a breath of real air. "I have to turn the system off. I have to stop them from putting more people in there," she said. "No," I let out in the weakest whisper. "There are people there. They'll die." "They're not real, Jack." "Yes, they are. Just let them live, please," I begged. The world around me went dark once more as I passed out from exhaustion. It would be several weeks before I finally woke up in the hospital. By then, the entire facility had upped and moved before the authorities could even be convinced to check it out. While my wife had spent considerable amount of effort finding the place, she just couldn't do it again. Meaning there was nothing I could do to protect the world I so dearly missed. During the next few days, I was introduced to old friends and family. I even had a son, one I, of course, couldn't recognize. To me, he was just a kid I'd never seen before, barely 7. It might make me sound like a bad guy, but I felt nothing for them. I just wanted to go back and see Mary, if she was even still alive. Not that it made a difference because she wouldn't remember me. I'd just be another strange face on the street. The life I knew had ended. I had been trapped inside the harsh truth of reality, and I didn't know if I could ever get used to it. I don't know who decided to trap inside that place or why. All I know for sure is that there are more people trapped inside there. And they need help escaping before the core can destroy them. And that is the end of that story. Wow, that was a really good one, honestly. Very good. Alrighty. Let's find a new story. Alright. Here's another. I hope you all are enjoying the stream and enjoying the stories. Again, if you enjoyed the stories, I make sure to leave links in the description so you can go and support the authors. I mean, if you keep them writing, at the very least, that gives me a chance to find them and bring them here to the asylum for permanent treatment. Anyway, so let's move on. Again, this is by Googly Eyes 93, The Many Eyes of the Ocean. The following is a transcription from the audio logs of Dr. Warren T. McCormick. These are being transcribed into writing by his daughter, Ellie McCormick, in order to preserve the quickly deteriorating reels of tape that he insisted on using because they sound better. As I've been transcribing these logs, I've found some that have proven unsettling. I hope to share these in hopes of finding the subjects of tapes and hopefully clarifying along it. For the purposes of transcription, anything said by the father will be in italics and marked in parentheses. The patient's dialogue will be written in plain text. Any interjections made by myself will be done in brackets as shown here. Log number 63748. Testing. Good. Today's date is 8/8/1998. I am the attending therapist, Dr. Warren T. McCormick. With me is the patient, Darren Forrest. The patient has been admitted for 6 days now with no attempt at speaking or communication of any kind in that time. Patient was found by Coast Guard in a fishing vessel, no others on board. I will be attempting to diagnose any psychological trauma as well as any account of what happened on board the vessel. Darren, can you hear me? Yes. Would you be willing to tell me what happened aboard the ship? Tempest, Fate, what happened to her? I'm hoping you can tell me that, Darren. You were found aboard the Fate a week ago. None of the other crew have been seen since you left port a month ago. What happened to them? Jesus. They're gone. They're all gone. You couldn't find any of them? I'm afraid not. Do you know where they may have gone? God help them. Wherever they went, it was so fate worse than hell. We were out there for about a week when it came up in the net. We figured it was just some accident had fallen off a ship or something in transit. What was it exactly, Darren? What do you mean? It isn't still there? The damn thing taunted me for what seemed like an eternity, just there on the deck, waiting for me. There was nothing there when you were recovered. There was a fucking coffin right in the middle of the main deck. God damn it, how could it not have been there? Can you please start from the beginning? I'm afraid I don't understand what you're trying to say. Fuck. Okay, so, we were out almost a week, I think. Routine run, just like we had done 1,000 times. It was Friday, maybe Thursday. I don't remember exactly. We pulled up the nets and dumped them on the deck as usual. This time, though, there was something big in one of the nets. Heard a big thump when it hit and crushed quite a few perfectly good fish. And Hank, our first mate, he went over to look at it. It turns out it was a damn coffin. We did some looking at it and noticed it was sealed up pretty tight. And Captain Kern figured it had fallen off a transit boat or something. Maybe someone that had died out of country or something. Hell, maybe it was an old one from back in the day that got lost. Who knows? Looking at it, we noticed it was sealed up good and tight. A bunch of big, old, heavy chains wrapped around it, and a big lock holding it together, rusted and covered in sea grime. Had a bunch of nonsense carved into the top and the sides of the wood. It wasn't any kind of language I'd ever seen.
Did you open the coffin?
God, no. Not then, at least. Me and Hank, we said we should throw it overboard. Captain Kerman, Tommy, though, they said we'd keep it, bring it into port, and see what they wanted to do with it there. So, of course, the captain overruled us all. We tied the thing off on the deck and left it there that night. The dreams started when we went to sleep later. It was surreal, like something out of an old pulp novel. I was on the deck. There was a storm moving in. As it got closer, and the wind picked up, the rain started. It wasn't raining like normal, though. Fish fell from the sky. Rotten, decaying fish. Some of them missing chunks or heads or entire bodies. Then lightning flashed. There was something huge in the clouds that I could see.
And what happened to you in this dream?
I woke up. There was another flash of lightning. I sat up so fast, I just about took my head off in the upper bunk. It was still dark out, so I got up and went to grab a drink from the galley. I noticed the door up on the deck was open, so I went to check it out. Captain and Tommy were up there with a pair of bolt cutters trying to open the damn box. I ran there and asked them what the hell they thought they were doing. And Captain just said there were valuables in it. Said he just knew it was something good. Like the coffin was calling out to him to open it or some shit like that. That was about the point the chain snapped from the bolt cutters and Tommy started throwing all of them off. He gets all the damn chains off and takes a crowbar to the lid when it still won't open. By then, Hank has heard all the commotion and joined us at the top. We're both pretty uneasy, looking at everything going on. This thing was shut tight, so someone obviously didn't want it open for a reason. It turns out I was nailed shut. Big iron nails had run through the entire outer perimeter of the lid, keeping it shut tight. Hell, I'm surprised any water was able to get in there. Tommy and Captain finally got it off there between the two of them, each using a crowbar.
Was there anything of valuable inside?
Patient lets out an audible shudder at this point. Seems to be tensing up, drawing in sharp breaths. Nothing of value. No, just the body. It looked fresh the day it died. The thing was, the person in the coffin was standing right beside me on the deck.
I'm afraid I don't follow.
It was Hank. Hank, was in the coffin, dead as a fucking doornail, but he was there. Poor guy, he looked at it and he immediately spewed his dinner all over the deck. So real. There's no way it wasn't Hank, you know, even though he was standing there right beside me. And so that was it. After we saw that, we put the lid back on and tied it down. Captain put some straps over the top to keep it closed since the nails were going back in, but the damage was done. Hank was in the coffin, and we didn't know what to make what we saw. I'm afraid that still doesn't explain the disappearances of your crewmates. 'Cause I ain't got there yet. We all headed toward the galley. Sat down at the table for a bit, just passing a bottle of whiskey around, trying to rationalize what we had seen. None of us had a better explanation than some shared psychosis. God, if that's what it had been, I wouldn't be here right now. The sun rose red that morning. You familiar with sailor superstition, Doc? I'm not. No. Red sunrise means death is on horizon. Always a bad sign, no matter what. We should have turned tail, had taken our asses back to port right then and there. But the captain was determined to stick to the schedule. We go that whole day with barely a damn fish coming up. Nets practically empty. We're way behind our usual haul. It's as if all the commotion the night before hadn't shaken us up enough. This was setting us further back. So we decided to call it early. Right around 3 or 4 in the afternoon instead of sunset like we usually do. Everyone eats for an early dinner, then goes off to their separate quarters for sleep. The damn dream started again for me, though. This time it was raining all those fish from the sky, and the big thing in the sky seemed even closer. I don't remember much of it, but there was something different in this one. I looked over the deck into the water. All of these damn fish falling from the sky, and out there in the surf were hundreds of bodies, thousands, packed in tight, almost blocking any view of actual water. God, I can still remember their faces. All of them, men, women, children, all facing upward, a look of pure horror on their faces. Mouths open in the loudest scream I couldn't hear over the storm. The thing that shook me, though, is their eyes. They didn't have any. None of them. Eyes were clawed out, and all that was left were the bloody pits where they once were. You can still see it, though. Wide look and eyelids pinned open in fear. They died in terror, seeing whatever had taken their vision coming straight for them. I woke up because of the screaming. The wind was howling outside and the rain was lashing the boat from every direction, but that scream pierced through all of it. I scrambled out of bed and up to the deck, not missing a beat, and managed to do it. Almost break my ankle going up the stairs while I was at it. Fuck. Hell, I wish I had. It would have kept me from seeing what happened. Captain and Tommy had each had one of Hank's arms, dragging him over to the coffin. There was blood all over the deck, too, getting scattered by the rain and sea foam washing over it, but there it was, leaving a crimson hue over the boat. When they reached the coffin, Tommy held Hank while Captain undid the straps and pushed the lid off. The thing that was inside wasn't Hank anymore. It was like a mash of ocean grime. You see shells embedded in parts of it, seaweed, urchins clinging to other parts. The worst thing was it was blinking. All over the body were eyes, all blinking at different times, darting in every direction. Hank was moaning in front of the coffin while the thing rose up out of it like some old vampire movie. Damn thing looked like it slithered out of there in one fluid motion. Suddenly he was standing right in front of Hank, reaching straight for him. Poor bastard. He tried to scream, but Tommy ran a knife right across his throat before he could make a sound. The thing in the coffin just put out its hands and just took him. 1 second he was there. The next second he was almost absorbed into it. And then Captain and Tommy just stood there looking at him. It kept looking everywhere. And that was it? Fuck no. They cut out their own eyes next. Both of them pulled out some damn oyster knives they must have taken from the kitchen. Oyster knives are dull as hell. They're meant just for prying shells open. They took the knives and... Here, Darren makes a horrible retching noise. Vomit can be heard hitting a trash can. They popped their own damn eyes out. They gave them to this thing like a fucking offering. Didn't they just walk straight off the boat into the ocean? I wasn't sticking around any longer. I ran back to my damn bunk and locked myself in. I had a gun in my footlocker that I pulled out and cradled. God knows if it would do me any good, but if push came to shove, I'd rather a bullet than whatever that thing did to Hank. I remember seeing the sun come up through the little porthole in my room. I waited until it was at least noon the next day before I tried to go check. The coffin was still there. The damn thing was still out there, standing beside it, just looking off in all directions. I know it saw me. I could feel the eyes follow me as I went back down. As long as it didn't come after me. I stayed at my quarters from then on, only making the occasional run when the sun was at its peak to bring food back with me. I would peek out every once in a while, and the thing would just be standing there, just staring. Sometimes at night, I could hear it whispering, like it was calling to me. There were nights I kept the muzzle of the gun pressed to my temple the entire time, telling myself to pull the trigger, pussying out at the last second. It was speaking to me. Like, I couldn't understand the language, but I know it was sinister. A few times, I would look out the porthole of my quarters. It was situated just below the water, so I could see fish pass by and the sun filter through the waves. Some nights, Tommy and the captain would be out there, looking at me with their hollow eye sockets, this big smile on their faces. They were waterlogged and decaying already, the skin waxing and peeling from their bones. The captain tried to scratch the glass one night, so his fingernails break right off. I covered the window after that. Everything after that is a blur. I remember the Coast Guard coming into the boat and shouting for me. Then it was this damn thing playing a trick on me to get out. I wasn't having it. It wasn't until they busted in the door and wrestled the gun away from me that I finally let go. I don't think I had slept in days. Doc, you said they didn't find the coffin when they got me. That is correct. God knows what we did setting that damn thing loose. I hope I don't have to see it. This ends the interview. My personal opinion is the patient believes the story he is telling. He's highly delusional, still speaking of continued dreams and a coming great flood he saw in his dreams. I recommend intensive therapy as well as institutionalization until rehabilitated. This is the end of the tape. There's still boxes of these damn things to go through. I'll update when I find anything else good. End transcription. And that was the end of the story, The Many Eyes of the Ocean, by Googly Eyes 93. If you enjoyed that story, make sure you let Googly Eyes 93 know. The link is down in the description for her or him. I don't quite sure know which. But anyway, for the author, the link is in the description to their Reddit page, so you can please let them know how much you enjoyed the stories. It's important that we let them know. Right? Of course. Otherwise, how am I going to get them to write more? Eventually, I had to bring them here. But if I can't keep them occupied, how am I going to get them here to the asylum? So let them know you like it. Alright, so let's move on. Let's move on to a new story. Let's see what we got. How about this one by Blue Wake? I went to meet my new neighbors, but I realized they had no facial expressions. Again, written by Blue_Wake. And as I said earlier, all of my authors, I place in the description a link to their Reddit pages so you can let them know how much you like their writing. After the new neighbors moved into the house next door, I was curious enough to introduce myself. Knowing what I know now, I should have minded my own business. One night they weren't there. The next morning they were, having arrived in a beat-up white van in the dead of night. The house had been vacant as long as I'd lived next door, a foreclosure sign perched in the front yard. I wrote freelance from my home and could see it from my office window. In all my staring out of that window while battling writer's block, I hadn't noticed anyone paying it a visit. The new owners must have closed the sale quickly at auction and just moved right in. The night after the van showed up in the driveway, I stayed up late working. That was when I got my first glimpse of the neighbors through the window at the side of the house. Peering through someone's window makes me sound like a voyeur, but I couldn't see much at all. Oddly, they hadn't turned any lights on, so all I could see were silhouettes passing through the darkened interior of the home. The only thing I could make out from their shadowy profiles was that there was a man and a woman. At one point, I looked up from my computer and saw the female silhouette had paused, its back to the window. It remained unmoving for a long minute before I realized I was wrong about which way it was facing. It was looking back at me. Something about the anonymous silhouette's gaze. It sent a chill down my spine. I closed my blinds and just called it a day. When I woke up the next morning, a thick black curtain hung in the window in the house next door. I didn't see either of the neighbors again until that night. I was returning home when I noticed a man bent over behind the open doors of the white van. One of the new neighbors. I paused. I felt a little self-conscious that I'd been caught peeking through his window, presumably by his wife. More importantly, I still wanted to know about the people who'd bought the long empty house next door. I decided to introduce myself. "Hey, neighbor," I began, cheerfully walking towards him. I saw you moved in next door. I'm calling. He stood up from the position he assumed halfway inside the van, and what I saw left me for a moment without words. He had no facial expressions. What that looks like, it's hard to describe. It's something I'd never seen before. Something I can almost guarantee you've never seen either. That there was nothing wrong with his face, at least in the conventional sense. He wasn't deformed, nor was it that his expression was just serious. No, this is different. In a normal person, there are 43 different facial muscles that work in tandem at all times to let you know what they're feeling. A tiny upturn in one's mouth indicates amusement. A scowl reads as anger. Even when someone tries their hardest to mask their emotions, those muscles create subconscious, imperceptible changes that let a keen observer see right through it. On the new neighbor's face, there simply was nothing to read. It was like his face was completely normal on the exterior, eyes blinking, lips moving, but below the skin there was nothing at all. A mask made of flesh and blood. Will Davis, we've been looking forward to meeting you, Colin. I snapped out of my trance when I realized he was talking to me. Your family. Where'd you move from? I stuttered. Yes, my wife, Amelia, and my son, Samuel. We were in Chicago before. We're happy to be in such a quiet neighborhood with such fine neighbors, Mr. Davis said. Looking him in the eye, I was unable to contextualize his words. Was he being friendly? Or only polite? I couldn't tell. Meanwhile, he pierced me with this intent stare, discerning my own bare emotions, even those I didn't want to show. Did he know how much this was freaking me out? And you, Colin, are you married? Mr. Davis continued. Paying attention for the first time to anything but his face, I noticed he was cradling a bundle of cloth in his arms. In a few places, the folds and wrinkles in the fabric parted to reveal something rigid, metallic, reddish, perhaps bronze. Mr. Davis crossed his arms, hugging the object tighter, protecting it from my vision. I remembered he asked me a question. It's just me here, I replied. Mr. Davis nodded. His hollow eyes glazed over. I'm happy we were able to meet, he said. I hope I can introduce you to my family soon. Yeah, sure thing, I said. At that point, I just wanted the conversation to end. Once I got home, I texted my friend Alex, detailing the conversation with Mr. Davis. But perhaps like you, Alex is the type who enjoys stories of strange occurrences. After a while, Alex replied, When you tell me this guy has no facial expressions, do you mean he never smiles? Sounds like he's got a stick up his ass, LOL. No, dude, I wrote. It's hard to explain if you haven't seen it. Is he still outside? Alex wrote. Take a picture of him. I went over to my window and brought my eye up to a gap in the blinds. Scanning the driveway, there was no sign of Mr. Davis. I was a second from texting Alex back. Sorry, no picture, when Mr. Davis stepped off his home's front steps. It looked like he was getting something else from the rear of the van. I held my phone's tiny camera lens up to the gap and snapped a picture. I sent Alex the photo, averting my eyes. I didn't want to see his face. It's sphinx-like absence of expression. For some reason, it just felt wrong. Like I'd done something I shouldn't have. Next morning, I had several unopened text messages from Alex. Is your phone messed up or something? Okay, you got me. Use one of those photo editor apps, right? You gonna explain that or what? I scrolled upwards through our conversation anxiously, but no choice but to take a look at the picture I tried to avoid. I shuddered in anticipation as I opened the photo, preparing to see Mr. Davies' uncanny face, but it wasn't there at all. The rest of the picture appeared exactly as it would have to the naked eye. The driveway, the white van, a man hunched over it, where the part of his face is visible to the camera's perspective should have been, though there was no clear image at all, only a distortion, like he was behind frosted glass, not cheaply superimposed over an image like when the TV news blurs someone out, but seamlessly integrated into his face. There's no quick photo editor app that could do that. I told Alex I hadn't doctored the photo. I waved it away as a glitch, but I didn't know if I believed my own excuse. I put it out of my mind until mid-afternoon when I noticed the item still trapped in my front door's mail slot. Curious, I stopped to take it out. A plain white envelope lacking postage or return address. The sender must have brought it to my door themselves. Inside was a small playing card. It contained a message composed in black ink and sloping, unbroken cursive. Colin, we cordially invite you to join us for an intimate meal at 9 tonight. We are eager to become better acquainted with you. Warmest regards, the Davis family. I didn't know what to make of the letter. Who has dinner at 9 o'clock? I had no intention of going until, of course, I told Alex about it. As I should have expected, he insisted I attend and tell him all the details. After some guilt-tripping about how social decorum and not being a shitty neighbor, I relented. Albeit reluctantly, I was going to dinner with the new neighbors. I arrived at the Davies house with a cheap bottle of wine. It was all I had to bring them, and besides, I wasn't spending money on the strangers. Standing on the front porch, a knot formed in the pit of my stomach as I thought once more of Mr. Davis' strange countenance. The door opened only a few seconds after I knocked. The knot tightened. Colin, Mr. Davis said, my family will be pleased that you joined us. Come in. He spoke flatly, and my inability to interpret his tone threw me off balance again. I followed Mr. Davies through the entrance hallway, turning right into the dining room. I glanced around the house as we walked through, trying not to make a show of it. The tile floors needed a power wash, and there was almost no furnishings save for the black curtains obscuring all the windows. Entering the dining room, I glanced into the adjacent kitchen for a second. It didn't look like anyone had been preparing dinner. I didn't even see a fridge. A wooden table in the dining room is draped in a silky tablecloth, sporting an intricate geometric pattern. This well-crafted item was a stark contrast to what I had seen in the rest of the house. There was no dishes on the table. Instead, in the center stood a tall bronze candle holder with several arms. I immediately recognized it as the item I'd watched Mr. Davies remove from the van. Engraved at its base was some kind of rune symbol. Each arm held a lit black candle. A woman sat at the end of the table. Her face, framed by mid-length brown hair, would have been pretty were it not for that same inexplicable trait Mr. Davies had, the one that made my skin crawl. That complete dearth of expression. She was a blank slate. She stood. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Colin. I'm Amelia Davies. Please don't mind the decor. It's a ceremonial formality before we break bread. Our faith is a foreign one. Adherents aren't common in this part of the country." I forced a smile, studied the table again, and realized there were 4 seats around it. "Samuel will be joining us later," Mr. Davies said, as if reading my mind. "He's been resting." Somewhere in the house, I thought I heard a quiet rattle. I had only been there a short time, but everything about it was strange. I needed to get my bearings. "Do you mind if I use your restroom?" I asked. Mr. Davies, who had stepped out while I talked to his wife, re-entered the dining room. Mr. and Mrs. Davies exchanged sidelong glance. "Across the house, near Samuel's bedroom," Mr. Davies said. "Just make sure not to rouse him." I headed in the direction he pointed me. I was still holding the wine bottle I brought. I must have been so tense I forgot to put it down. I passed the hallway through which I'd entered the home. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something which chilled me to my core. A length of rusted chain stretched taut across the front door. Padlocks secured it to brackets affixed to both ends of the doorframe. This wasn't a dinner. This was a trap. I hurried toward the bathroom, finding it across from what was presumably Samuel's bedroom. The bathroom was bare like the kitchen. No toiletries or cosmetics in sight. I didn't know what was going on, but I needed a way out. The back door wasn't an option. When Mr. Davies chained the front door while I was talking to his wife, he wouldn't have overlooked that. My best bet was to lock myself in the bathroom and contact the police, but I didn't want to draw attention by making the call. Instead, I texted Alex. "Listen to me. There's something very wrong at the Davies house. I need you to call the police and tell them to get here now." Mrs. Davies called for me from outside the bathroom. "Colin, are you all right in there? We're waiting." Alex replied, "Chill out, man. LOL. Tell me what's going on." I began to panic. Alex was more concerned with indulging in his nosiness than helping me out. "Colin," Mrs. Davies called impatiently, "come on out, dear. We'd like you to meet Samuel." My gut told me I did not want to meet Samuel. "1 second!" I shouted. I texted Alex again. "Not joking. Call police now." The doorknob began to jiggle. Mrs. Davies was trying to open it. It stopped after a while, but she hadn't given up. "You'll have to come out, one way or another," said Mrs. Davies. The sound of metal connecting with metal began to emanate from between the door and the doorframe. Mrs. Davies was using something to pry the latch open. The door would be open in any second. I gripped the bottle of wine I was still holding so tight my knuckles went white and faced the door. I heard the pop of the latch and raised the bottle above my head. The door swung open, revealing Miss Davies, kitchen knife in hand, and on the other side. I brought the bottle down with as much force as I could. It shattered over Mrs. Davies' head, sending splitters of glass careening through the air. She slumped to the floor, rivers of red wine flowing down her head and shoulders like blood. I noticed, though, despite open cuts on her skin and caused by glass, she wasn't actually bleeding. I ran out of the bathroom, stepping over Mrs. Davies. Mr. Davies stood blocking the end of the hallway I'd come down. He carried something he hadn't before, an old but razor-sharp bronze dagger. Its hilt adorned with the same rune I'd seen earlier. Mr. Davies began to advance down the hall. Running towards the far end of the house, I noticed a door I hadn't tried, narrower than the rest I had seen. Whatever the room was inside, I hoped there was something I could barricade the door with. I opened the door to find a steep set of wooden stairs leading into a darkened basement below. Down the hall, Mr. Davies was closer. He paused beside Samuel's room and opened the door. A tall figure lumbered out of the room. It was humanoid, but not humid, composed of thick black lines, scribbled, not fixed, but constantly fluctuating, threatening to escape the boundary of the person-like shape and degenerate into something else entirely. I bolted into the basement without a second thought. The basement was dingy, filled with the junk left behind by the previous homeowners. In one of the darkest corners opposite the stairs, I found a hiding place beside a futon covered with dusty old sheets. As footsteps marched toward the basement door upstairs, I scooted behind the futon but collided with something. I turned around. I was face to face with a dead body. Backing up as far as I could without exposing my position, I saw there was not one dead body, but two. They appeared to have been mummified somehow, preventing full decomposition. Carved into their foreheads was the symbol. That familiar rune. The door creaked open upstairs, and peeking out, I saw two figures begin to slowly descend the steps. Mr. Davies still carrying the blade with which he would cut that wretched rune into my forehead, and that shape they called Samuel.
"Come out, Colin,"
Mr. Davies called.
"Samuel wants to meet you. Samuel wants to be you."
The footsteps got closer as they creaked down the steps. That mass of unstable blackness loomed over Mr. Davies' shoulder as he came into full view. Perched on one of the bottom steps, he surveyed the basin for me, his expressionless stare sweeping from one side to the next. And sirens. They began faintly becoming louder as they rapidly moved closer to the home. Alex had saved me. Sensing that the source of the sirens were closing in on the house, Mr. Davies turned to the figure and motioned for it to turn back. Despite being thwarted, his face belied no disappointment, anger, or fear, just that same cursed stare. The shape, however, released an ear-splitting screech before they both fled upstairs. By the time the police managed to breach the house and found me huddled in the basement, they were already gone. As far as I know, those people I called the Davies family still haven't been found. I say it that way because it wasn't their real name. Later at the police station, Detective Sims, the lead on what is now a double homicide case, told me what she knew. That house was never purchased, Sims explained. It's still on the market. People who called themselves Will and Amelia Davies gave you false names. We know where they got them from. Those bodies in the basement. Medical examiner just ID'd them as Will and Amelia Davies, a couple who went missing along with their 6-year-old Samuel in Chicago a few months back. Emmy thinks they'd been dead about that long. Sims paused, remembering something. Can you describe these folks for me again? I obliged. All right, stay put, Sims said. I want to show you something. She left the room, returning with a printout of a photograph. The real Davies family. It was a family portrait of a couple and their small child. The couple were identical to the people I'd called Mr. and Mrs. Davies. Well, almost identical. There was one difference. The people in the photograph were smiling.
Dun dun dun.
Nifty. That was pretty creepy, gotta say. Makes you wonder who they were. Alright, I think we're going to do one more story before we call it a night. This one is called Pareidolia by Jgrupe, another one of the writers that I have worked with previously in the past with several stories. Great writer. And again, as I've said before, if you enjoy these stories, please let the writers know. I put the links down in the description below so that you can look up their Reddit pages and read the stories that they have. You could also message them through Reddit there and tell them how much you enjoyed the stories. Again, this is titled Pareidolia by Jgrupe. Warning: self-harm is listed in this story. My dad used to say he could see faces in floor tiles. The ones in the bathroom specifically. I laughed and told him it's a normal thing. It's called pareidolia, the tendency to see a pattern where there is none. Like seeing a cloud and thinking it looks like a turtle. People see faces in inanimate objects all the time, within wood grains and ink blots, tea leaves and spilled paint. We see something where there is nothing. The Blessed Virgin in a grilled cheese. Jesus in a water stain under the sink. St. Peter in a quesadilla. I laughed, but after my dad passed away, I started seeing them too. On the floor tiles, not in quesadillas. They look angry, he had told me, and they're leaving messages now. I don't think this is pareidolia. That had really scared me for some reason. My dad was a smart guy. He already knew what pareidolia was, even if I thought I was teaching him something new. Like how we watched Jeopardy, he already knew the answers, even if I was the only one who said them out loud occasionally. So when I started noticing the faces in the floor tiles after his death, I took note. I began to draw them, to write down the messages they were sending as I tried to decipher their hidden meanings. I tried not to become as obsessed with them as he had been before he died, before he drowned. The faces in the floor tiles didn't look angry to me. They looked happy, pleased with themselves. I thought it was fun at first, seeing faces and reading the secret messages they left for me, deciphering them, not just in the floor tiles, but increasingly in more and more places. The floor tiles told me to look out for the bike messenger, and on my walk into work, I saw him coming and stopped my tracks. If I had continued on, I would have been splashed a second later by the big puddle he veered into accidentally. I would have ended covered up in mud, and my day would have been ruined. I grinned and walked into work, knowing I had a special line to some power that had a few tricks up its sleeves. This had clearly just been a way to prove its abilities, and I wondered what would be next. The messages came again soon after, hidden in the patterns of the marble countertop in the kitchen at work. While stirring the cream into my coffee, I stared at it and tried to make it out. Just as I deciphered the message, someone said, "You all right there, George?" It was my boss. He was staring at me while I mindlessly stirred my coffee, as if I had been doing it for 5 minutes. I also had been speaking silently under my breath as I tried to make out the words in the hidden message in the marble countertop. "Oh, sorry, yeah, just lost in thought. What's up?" He shook his head and went over to the fridge to pick up another energy drink. As he walked past me on his way back to the office, he muttered under his breath, "Really know how to pick 'em, don't you, Craig?" I'm pretty sure he's going to fire me soon. Anyway, that message told me what to do next. There were online forums, it said, places where I could learn more, places I could find a community among those who were able to see the messages, the faces. On the dark web, I found a hidden community and used the password given to me by the messengers in the marble slab. Further proof, in fact, that this was real. The password worked. They permitted me to become a member of their organization, the Paradoliacs. A secretive community had one purpose: to follow the directions set forth by the messengers and fulfill their commands. I became a valued member of the organization after I revealed I had a talent for drawing the hidden faces and decoding their messages. Not everyone was capable of that. Most had to simply remember things as best they could, since the faces never showed up in photographs. Soon I was spending all of my time with the other members of the group online decoding secret messages. My family wanted to know about my interests, so I told them about our group. They told me I was losing it, that I needed to get help. But it didn't matter how much I tried to convince them. They told me there was nothing more there than pareidolia, finding patterns where there were none. My mom booked me a session with a psychotherapist just for a chat, she said. I was taking my father's death too hard, and my obsession with the faces was a delusion brought on by PTSD, perhaps. Because of what I had witnessed that day at the pier. I told her she was wrong. I knew for a fact she was wrong. She said I sounded just like my father. And the next time I saw the faces in the patterned ceiling of a subway car, I noticed that they looked angry. They told me to go to the pier, to the same dock where it had happened, to where he died. And so I did. Looking down into the inky black water from the rickety wooden deck above, I watched as the light shimmered and reflected off the surface of the lake, making patterns where there were none. Messages and faces, familiar faces sorely missed and gone too soon, joined him. My foot stepped over the edge. I was about to lean over and plunge myself into the cold brackish waters below when I saw the faces appear beside the words, no longer angry, but not smiling either. It looked hungry. It took a step back and it scowled. Shaking my head, I tried to clear my thoughts and remember why I was even there. Why was I doing this? The shimmering reflection of the moon on the water below told me not to worry, not to fret, just give in. And before I knew it, I was falling. Ice cold water shocked me, and I felt myself incapable of movement as my mind blanked completely, unable to register the gravity of the situation I had just found myself in. I realized immediately I didn't want this. Whatever force had brought me here, it was the same one that had killed my father. It had been deceiving me all this time, reeling me in with the secret messages hidden in the tiles and the woodwork, in the marble countertops and patterned ceilings. The force of it pulled me down, grabbed me by the ankles, and took me under the surface, gulping down water instead of air, immediately out of breath. My legs began to kick, and I started trying to swim upward toward the surface of the ice-cold water. I managed to come up for air and coughed up a lungful of water and took a great, gasping breath of air, looking around with panic-wide eyes. There was no one around this late at night, and the waves were high, and a large one was just about to break and crash down on me. I held my breath and braced for the impact. The wall of water crashed into me. I felt my nose bloodied from the sudden hit. Water went up it as well and into my airways, and I found myself plunged below and unable to expel it. I sank down and down, feeling heavy with the weight of my clothes, disoriented from the force of the impact from the wave. The water was reflecting in odd patterns, making it appear that it was down and up, and down was up. Running out of breath, I struggled to find my way back to the surface, but could not decide which way to go. I picked the direction that felt right and kicked as hard as I could to try to get back on the surface. I was terrified I would die, but at the same time furious, for I knew the entity had killed my father was attempting to do the same to me. Only now that I was about to die in the same watery grave where his body had been lost and never found, I realized how foolish I had been. I cursed myself, remembering how I sided with the people from the message boards instead of my own mother, and wished I had believed her when she said the paradoliacs were nothing but trouble. That was when I saw the rope ladder suddenly appear beside me. I looked up and saw my mother standing on the pier, a worried look on her face. She was screaming at me and pointing at the rope ladder as I thrashed and struggled in the icy water. Grabbing onto the first rung I could get my hands on, I began to climb. Once I got out of the water, she told me she had been worried that I was starting to follow in my father's footsteps. That maybe the secret messages and hidden codes had brought me to the very place that had taken his life. She had brought the rope ladder from my childhood treehouse, thinking she might need it for some reason. A little voice inside her head said to bring it along. And she had listened. And that is the end of that story. That was pretty interesting. Pretty good. Alright, we got a little more time. Go ahead and do one more story. This one by Horror Queen 1212, titled, I'm Blind. Thank God. Again, all the details about the authors is in the description. I know I say this every time, but it's important to me to make sure everyone knows about these authors, because how else am I supposed to get them being convinced to join the asylum here with me? So, please, let them know how much you love their stories and how demented they truly are. That way they can come to the asylum to be here with me and write the stories for me. Alrighty, let's get on. Again, the title is I Am Blind. Thank God, by by Horror Queen 1212. Maggie had lived a spectacularly normal life till she was blinded at 19 in a freak accident. In a matter of moments, her life was altered forever. She had to learn how to live in this world forever black. The tools were out there, and she was given help, but no one could pretend it was easy. She was thankful for her best friend Shannon, who stuck through her through everything. By the time they were in their mid-20s, they were living together in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment. Even though Maggie was so much better at navigating her world, she would still stumble into things in the tiny space. She couldn't complain, though. She was just happy to have a place where she belonged. Shannon got off work 3 hours earlier than Maggie, so she would usually greet her when she got home. That night was different. It was a night that would last forever for Maggie. She had gotten off work and made it into the apartment. She shuffled her way through the pitch-black world, waiting to hear the voice of her best friend. It never came. Maybe Shannon had went out and forgotten to tell her. Maybe she had gone to bed early. Maggie walked the memorized path to Shannon's room. She obviously couldn't see anything, but she didn't hear anything either. She walked forward to the bed and reached out a hand. She gently placed her hand on Shannon's arm, hoping she wouldn't wake her. Shannon stayed unmoving, letting Maggie know she hadn't woken her up. She quietly walked out of the room and went into her own. She got ready for bed and fell into a peaceful slumber. When Maggie woke the next morning, she could tell she had slept in. She couldn't see the light shining through her window, but she had a feeling she had slept in that Saturday morning. She stretched her arm and pushed the button on her specialized alarm clock. An electronic voice said it is 12:35 p.m. Maggie was shocked. Shannon was an early riser, and try as she might to keep quiet, she would always accidentally wake up Maggie by 9 at the latest. She sat up in bed. "Shan?" she called out sleepily. No reply. She walked to her friend's bedroom and reached down over the bed. She shook the girl under the covers, but she didn't budge. Scared, she shook harder, but to no avail. She could feel something sticky on her hands, but couldn't place what it was. As she tried to wake her best friend, her hand shifted to Shannon's uncovered shoulder. She screamed. It was ice cold. She stumbled in shock and grabbed her phone, calling 911. When the paramedics arrived, she could hear their gasps of horror. She was ushered out of the apartment. Her questions of, "What is it?" went ignored. The only thing she could get out of them was that Shannon was dead. "How can you tell? You were only in there for a moment. How do you know she's still not alive?" she asked desperately. One of the paramedics made a comment under his breath. "You don't need to feel a pulse when you walk into a scene like that." The other paramedic, a lady, shushed him, but it was too late. "What scene?" Maggie asked. All she got in return was silence and the feel of someone rubbing her shoulder. Soon she could hear the sound of police sirens, leaving her with a sense of dread and even more questions. It took many hours, but when she finally got some answers, she regretted asking. Shannon was laying dead in her bed. Her neck had been slit all the way until bone was visible. The stickiness on Maggie's hands had been some of the overflowing blood from her best friend's body. According to detectives, she had been dead for around 16 hours, meaning she had been killed around the time Maggie had gotten home. It looked like the murderer The murder had actually happened in the kitchen and the killer moved the body into the bed. This fact sickened Maggie the most. It meant Shannon had already been dead when she checked her on the previous night. The fact she had unknowingly slept a room away from her best friend's corpse was haunting to her. Detectives believe this was the act of the haircut killer, or HCK, due to the fact a large section of her hair appeared to be braided and cut. HCK was at large, and Maggie believed she wouldn't find any peace until he was caught. She never thought his capture would lead to more distress. It was almost 5 years later when the man was apprehended. His name was Charles Davos, and he had killed 23 women. The story was all over the news. Davos gave a 2-hour interview that was broadcasted on basic cable. Maggie tuned in wanting answers. Her whole world came to a stop as Davos spoke about his most memorable murder. He had just killed a woman and put her in her bed and was starting to braid her hair. Suddenly, her roommate came into the apartment and then the room. He was ready to kill her when he realized she was blind by the way she wasn't making eye contact. She walked the crime scene without even realizing she was in danger. He laughed as he recalled the tale. Maggie didn't laugh. Okay, that's the end of tonight's stream, I think. That was a good set of stories. I want to save a couple more for the next stream, which will be... I'm going to try to get it so we can go on Wednesdays again. See if we get enough stories, then I will do so. If not, the next stream will be next week on Saturday. So I will make sure to be placing messages all through the Discord channels, as well on Facebook and Twitter. So if you do want to check in on what's going on, please feel free. Other than that, I think we're just going to go ahead and call it a night. Now, I wanted to thank you all for joining me tonight in these streams. Obviously, some of them can be more enjoyable than others, but that's also the way things are in the night. Sometimes you have a bad dream, and sometimes you have a good one. In case you missed any part of the live stream or showed up late, I do leave the streams up on my channel. You can also direct friends and family to listen to them in case they're unable to make our visiting hours. We finally reached the end of our time here together this evening. Visiting hours are now over. And while I hope to see you all here again, perhaps I can convince you to be permanent residents at the asylum. I am Beyond 5150, and I wish you all wonderful nightmares. Good night. Sleep tight, and just ignore the screams.